Welcome everyone who is joining us at the TOPA Forum. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Anna Cash and I'm the Partnership for the Bay's Future Fellow for the City of Berkeley. We will be starting in earnest in just a few minutes here. We're going to put a message in the chat about Spanish interpretation. And if you are interested in asking a question about TOPA during the forum, some of us have backgrounds, the panelists up that give the information about how to ask a question. But essentially you can either put your question in the Q&A function of Zoom if you're watching on Zoom. And if you're joining by live stream, you can send an email to berkeleytopa@gmail.com. And again, that information is in the backgrounds of some of the panelists. And so yeah, I'm also going to put a message in the chat regarding surveys on other anti-displacement policies here in Berkeley. And sit tight, and Mayor Arreguín will kick things off shortly. Thank you so much for being here with us to discuss this important policy.
And I just want to double check. Would you like me to give the welcome at this time?
I think you can maybe wait 1 minute for more folks to join, and then, yeah, just a minute.
Thank you.
Sí te escucho, Oscar, en el canal de español.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Jesse Arreguín, and welcome to this virtual community forum on the proposed Berkeley Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And I want to take this opportunity as we start this meeting today to thank our co-hosts, the East Bay Community Law Center, the Northern California Land Trust, Bay Area Community Land Trust, and PolicyLink, to thank our panel of community leaders and experts that will be sharing their knowledge around TOPA policies and how they work, and the reason that this legislation is an important tool in addressing our housing affordability crisis. We look forward to presenting more on this innovative proposal and answering your questions. So why are we here? Why is this even proposed? First, we know that Berkeley has had a long history of discrimination in housing, going back to its founding. Restrictive covenants prevented African Americans, Asian Americans, and other people of color from living in parts of our community. And our zoning system in Berkeley was built on a foundation of discrimination. And so we know that due to these discriminatory policies, and also due to the lack of housing, that has exacerbated housing unaffordability in Berkeley and displacement and racial segregation in our community. So if we are really to fulfill the values and vision of who we are as a city, we need to expand housing opportunities for people at all income levels and build wealth and ensure long-term stability for families in our community. We also know we have a shortage of affordable housing. Alameda County is the 17th most unaffordable market in the United States. And in Berkeley, home prices and rents have increased dramatically in the last 10 years. We also know we're facing a displacement crisis and a homelessness crisis as a result of the lack of affordable housing. And so I really do see this policy as a way for us to be able to address these challenges. Given where we are in this country, the issue of systemic racism, which really came to the forefront this past year with the murder of George Floyd and national demonstrations for racial justice and police accountability, we need to address the issue of systemic racism, not just in policing, but in all aspects of our society. And so I do believe that TOPA is a tool for us to not only address the issues of systemic racism, but to also to expand affordability, stability, and to ensure that longtime residents of our community can stay in our community. Key to this policy is ensuring dedicated funding so that tenants can be able to purchase their buildings. Key to this policy is working with property owners, working with the realtors, working with our city government and working with other partners to help ensure its successful implementation. This is not a silver bullet. This is one tool in a toolbox that the city of Berkeley is engaged in to prevent displacement and address our affordability crisis. So we look forward to presenting this proposal and answering your questions. This is a very important transformative policy, but we recognize it's also complex. And so we're here to explain, we're here to listen. Feedback is important to us as this policy moves through the city's legislative process. I'm committed to trying to get robust input from the community as we are refining this policy before it goes to the Berkeley City Council sometime this spring or summer. So with that, it's really my pleasure to introduce Pastor Michael Smith, the pastor of the McGee Avenue Baptist Church, and also a longtime Berkeley resident and also an incredible community leader. We're very fortunate that he has agreed to moderate this discussion today. And so I turn the meeting over to Pastor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are so excited that you and the city of Berkeley is engaged in this discussion around TOPA. I am Michael Smith, pastor of the McGee Avenue Baptist Church, as well as the president of the Berkeley Black Ecumenical Ministerial Alliance, known as BEMA. We are really excited about TOPA in BEMA in that of all the things that Mayor Erguin said, we have seen in many of our congregations and our communities around Berkeley, the issues of displacement and gentrification. We've dealt with people within our community and our congregations that are not finding affordability to be an opportunity here in Berkeley. We've seen families pushed out, families that really need the right to return, finding housing. And as Mayor Green has said, the issue around TOPA is not just a tangential issue around things such as systematic and structural racism, but they are kind of at the heart of families and communities being able to engage, not only African Americans, but others who are experiencing displacement. And we think TOPA is a great opportunity and tool. So we're really excited tonight. We have a distinguished panel, obviously including our honorable mayor, but welcome our guest panelists tonight that will be talking to them and asking them some questions to help crystallize the power and the opportunity that lays before us with TOPA. So welcome. In addition to Mayor Eric Green, we ask that you welcome Oscar Arteta, who will be doing Spanish translation so that we can make sure that we engage with segments of our community that may often be forgotten, but are still impacted directly with TOPA. Also, we have Seema Rapani and Hewitt Shinkuti. They're attorneys and drafters from the East Bay Community Law Center. The EBLC is a Berkeley-based nonprofit legal aid clinic founded in 1988 with the mission to advance justice through advocacy and education. We also have Saki Bailey from the Bay Area Community Land Trust. We're so excited to have her. Layla Lugene Butler, a realtor, Berkeley native, and a part of BEMA. We're so excited to have her, as well as Richard Holbert, broker working with Impact Commercial, who's done a lot of work on San Francisco's Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, San Francisco's version known as COPA, as well as Tanya Jackson, a former development consultant on DC TOPA, and a resident of DC and TOPA Creative Cooperative, as well as a Berkeley graduate. So excited to have her. And then Alexis Link, who actually lives in a building on 10th Street, where residents who've worked with the Northern California Land Trust to acquire a building when it was up for sale. So we're so excited to have them. We're so excited to have you all in this space. And we're going to get into this discussion. And hopefully you've heard the housekeeping. There'll be opportunities to discuss in the chat, and questions that you can raise in the chat as well as in berkeleytopa@gmail.com. So without further ado, we want to get into our questions. And this first question that we have as we begin to go forward, we're going to ask this first question. What should we know? What should we know about the TOPA policy proposal, and how has it been changed based on feedback? That is a question specifically from Mayor Araguin, as well as Hewitt and Seema from the East Bay Community Law Center. I'll read the question one more time. What should we know about the TOPA policy proposal? How has it been changed based on stakeholder feedback?
Well, I'm happy to kick things off. This is something that the city of Berkeley has been exploring for about 5 years now, and it's in response to some of the challenges I touched upon in my initial comments. Our housing affordability crisis, the limited supply of ownership housing, the need to prevent displacement, and particularly to prevent the exodus of our African-American community. I think it's important to acknowledge that our Black community has gone from 20% in 1970 down to roughly 7% today. And we're also seeing the displacement of other communities of color and low-income families in our community. And we are really to live up to the vision of who we are as a racially diverse and inclusive community. If we do really stand for equity and inclusion, then we need to ensure that all people can afford to live here and can stay here in this community. So, this is a policy that I think many people in this room would agree on the underlying goals: to prevent displacement, to preserve affordable housing, to create ownership opportunities and stability, and to level the playing field for tenants and qualified organizations. And we need bold action to address our housing crisis and to keep Berkeley diverse and affordable. And that bold action includes the right for tenants to buy their buildings when they're put on the market. It's not a mandate for landlords to have to sell, it's just giving tenants the right of first refusal. And also funding to help support tenants to organize and to buy their buildings and keep them permanently affordable. And one additional thing I want to highlight, a key piece of this whole initiative is our small sites program. And I'm really committed to ensuring that the city puts at least $10 million into our small sites program so that tenants and nonprofits can buy existing apartment buildings to keep them affordable, to preserve long-term affordability, to help ensure conversion to a land trust or cooperative model if so desired. And so that's going to be a critical piece of this as well. And I'm committed to advocating for the resources to help implement TOPA.
Great. Seema, Hewitt, is there anything that you would like to add to what the mayor has said?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Mayor and Pastor Mike. My name is Hewitt Shankut again. I work with Seema Rupani and Fernando Echeverria in our community economic justice practice at EBCLC. And our work really in CEJ is focused on creating long-term solutions, proactive solutions to poverty using a racial justice and an anti-displacement framework. And so to be clear, we are a mission and client-driven nonprofit. We're not paid consultants for the city in this TOPA work. So we've been developing and researching the concept of a TOPA combined with a small sites program as one powerful anti-displacement strategy in Berkeley for over 5 years now here in the community economic justice practice. And since about 2019, we've been more actively drafting policy and in this process have been working with the mayor and our Berkeley TOPA working group, which is composed of local community land trusts, community-based organizations, and tenant advocates. So in short, the big picture of what TOPA is that when a rental property owner decides to sell, TOPA gives the current tenants a chance to purchase the rental property or select a qualified organization to purchase on their behalf. So in a nutshell, the TOPA process starts with the landlord seller giving tenants and qualified organizations a notice of intent to sell, which then activates the right of first offer. Then the tenants can decide to make an offer to purchase, assign to a qualified organization, or waive their rights. If the tenants waive their rights, then qualified organizations have some time to make an offer. If no tenant or qualified organization submits an offer, then the TOPA process terminates and the seller is free to sell on the market. Now, if the tenants or qualified organization do make an offer, seller is free to accept or reject the offer. And if the seller accepts, then they stand to benefit from transfer tax discounts. And if the seller rejects the offer made by the tenants or the qualified organization, then the seller can go out into the market to secure a third-party offer, with the caveat that the tenants or the qualified organization whose offer the seller rejected, they reserve the right to match the seller's third-party offer and then purchase the property. And so that's known as the right of first refusal.
Thanks, Hewitt. And I'm just going to go over briefly some of the changes that we've made since last March. Some of you have been following this policy for a while, and you know that it was introduced to the Land Use Policy Committee last March. And we've taken in a lot of feedback since then from different stakeholders and tried to craft a reasonable policy. And this is not a comprehensive list of changes. We're still working on it. We're still in the weeds of drafting and taking in feedback, but some highlights are, we heard the feedback about the appraisal provision. So we've actually removed the appraisal provision from the latest version to avoid confusion, to simplify the process, to make it extra clear that sellers will get fair market value for their sale. We're also tightening other provisions to safeguard tenants' right of first refusal, sort of to make up for that. We've also added a confidentiality provision to ensure that sellers, tenants, qualified organizations, and supportive partners keep information that's exchanged under TOPA confidential. And a note on disclosures, something that we've changed is when sellers are obligated to give disclosures to the tenants and the qualified organizations. Previously, that was with the initial notice of intent to sell, but we realized that some landlords, want to notify tenants and qualified organizations as early as possible that they intend to sell the property so that they can get early notification if tenants are interested or if a qualified org is interested. And so, you can do that. If you're a landlord, you can notify your tenants as soon as you want to sell and let them, start the timeline for them expressing interest. And you can simultaneously get your property ready for the market. There's nothing that interferes with you getting an agent or getting inspections. And if the tenants or qualified org expresses interest, then you would be required to share disclosures so that they can make a serious offer. A couple other changes, permanent affordability is still baked into the ordinance. So qualified organizations that purchase a property must still commit to keeping the property permanently affordable. However, tenant purchasers will now be subject to permanent affordability requirements only as dictated by the underlying subsidies, the public subsidies. And just one last note, we understand this is a complex policy. So we've worked to streamline and clarify a number of issues, including the details of existing exemptions, like the medical emergency exemption for smaller property owners. I highly encourage you to check out the FAQs on the Yes to TOPA website to see more of the details of this. And these key changes are also on the website, but we're going to continue to update that as we make changes.
Very well. Thank you very much. So question 2, we want to raise this question. Why is TOPA needed, especially in the current environment, the current context? We'd like to ask Mayor Erguin, as well as Alexis and Saki and Richard, if you all could really weigh in over the next 14 minutes or so. Please, let's have some good discussion about that. Why is TOPA needed, especially in the current context? Mr. Mayor, I'll start with you.
Well, thank you, Pastor Smith. And I touched on some of the key reasons. One, to correct the historic racial segregation that exists in our city, to address our our housing affordability crisis, to keep families in Berkeley, and to build wealth and provide stability in our neighborhoods. That's why this policy is needed. I want to provide some statistics. As I mentioned, sadly, like many communities throughout the United States, Berkeley, despite our progressive reputation, does have a history of racial exclusion. And now there are barriers to homeownership and also barriers to accessing housing in our community. And over 50% of the people experiencing homelessness in Berkeley are African American. So the systemic racism is also manifested in our homelessness crisis as well. To provide some information on Berkeley's history of sort of racial exclusivity, 80% of today's gentrifying areas in the East Bay were redlined, and we know that parts of Berkeley were on redlining maps, and African Americans, Japanese Americans, and other people of color were not allowed to live in parts of our city. And as I mentioned, our zoning ordinance was built on a foundation of racial exclusion. And so, once again, with the national reckoning on racism in our society, we had thousands of people marching in the streets of Berkeley last year in response to the murder of George Floyd and calling for an end to systemic racism in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. If we really do believe that Black Lives Matter, if we really do believe in equity and opportunity, then we need to remove those barriers that exist in our city. And part of it is by increasing housing opportunities for people at all income levels and all races. We also have a shortage of affordable housing. As I mentioned, Alameda County is the 17th most unaffordable housing market in the United States, and Berkeley is especially expensive. And since 2000, adjusting for inflation, single-family home values in Berkeley have increased by 225%, compared to a 200% increase in Alameda County. Despite our strong tenant protections and our rent control ordinance, displacement still takes place to this day, and Black people are disproportionately being displaced in Berkeley. 75% of low-income census tracts in Berkeley are at risk of or experiencing gentrification or displacement. And between 2000 and 2015, Alameda County lost over 1,900 low-income Black households. And those losses have been concentrated in the flatlands of Berkeley and in Oakland. And between 1990 and 2018, Berkeley lost 49% of its Black population. Compare that to Oakland and San Francisco, which lost 40 and 43%. As I mentioned, in the 1970 census, we were at 20% of our city's population African American. We're now roughly around 8 or 7%. That just shows the devastating impact that our housing affordability crisis has had on the racial diversity of our city, and pushing people out to the furthest parts of our region, which also has a climate impact, because those people are going to be driving into Berkeley if they work in Berkeley, and creating impacts on our climate. So Berkeley has always been at the forefront of innovative progressive leadership, and I see this policy as one more example of Berkeley stepping forward to address the challenges facing cities in the 21st century. And this is just one of many tools that the city has in place to address our housing affordability and displacement crisis. And we look forward to your input as we're refining this proposal.
Great. Alexis, Saki, Richard, would you like to add anything?
Of course, I'll just speak to my experience of living in Berkeley since '95, and I was 2 when we moved to Berkeley. I'm now 27, so 10th Street has been my residence and my home for all that I can remember. And I've seen a lot of the changes the mayor has spoken about, with people being pushed out. A lot of the community that I grew up around, who made it possible to be a resident and get to school and activities and things, they no longer live in Berkeley because it's no longer affordable. I'm really excited about TOPA just because personally in our 10th Street residence here, we had a situation where our previous landlord, before NCLT took it over, he placed our property for sale without telling us. So there was months of investors coming in and out of our units with 24-hour notices. And the landlord was saying he just wants, to fix some things. And he's going to fix things and we don't have anything to worry about. And come to find out, we find the listing online due to neighbors around us who have, been our neighbors for years. And that's when it was brought to NCLT, and we all put in a fight as far as trying to stay where we have called home for the past 20 plus years. I had a neighbor, AJ, who was 90, and we were literally all gathering and meeting and sending letters just so people know how important it is that we kept this community that we built all this time to make it safe, to make a family that we can call home. So TOPA, I feel like, will give tenants the right to put their stake into where they feel is like home. So, yes.
Great. Anyone else?
Hi, Pastor Mike. This is Saki Bailey from the Bay Area Community Land Trust. I want to just take a little time to highlight why the time to act is now, and why displacement is an issue that affects all of us, whether we're tenants or property owners, and that we have to unite around this issue. We cannot stay divided. We need TOPA now, and not in a few years from now, not a year from now, because there are a couple of factors which have really changed the landscape here in the Bay Area. One, of course, is COVID-19. There are a number of rental property owners who are going to be getting out of the rental business, and companies like Wedgwood, made infamous and rightly so by the Moms for Housing movement, are poised to gobble up these properties in Berkeley. They haven't reached them yet, but they have gobbled up our neighbors in Oakland, and they are just right around the corner. And we cannot let what happened in 2008 and 2009 happen here in Berkeley. What happened in Oakland, these companies came up and gobbled up all of these properties, made the rents unaffordable, closed up ownership opportunities, even for people who have been natives of Oakland for years. So the same thing is going to happen here in Berkeley, and we have to act now. A second part of this is that we are on the verge of a real estate apocalypse. In 10 years from now, it's going to take so much, huge amounts of city subsidy to buy properties, and no local government's going to be able to sustain that. We have to act now if we're going to make these homes affordable. And I represent an organization, Bay Area Community Land Trust, a nonprofit, a land trust, and land trusts like mine are the ones that are going to be put first and foremost at the front of the line through this TOPA policy to buy up these types of properties that come up on the market instead of corporations like Wedgwood. That's critical because organizations like mine are keeping these properties not just affordable for this generation of renters and homeowners, but for forever, in perpetuity, because rather than putting in subsidy for one generation of homeowners, we keep the subsidy with the land. It stays with the land permanently, and that's how we keep homes permanently affordable going into the future. And making homes affordable is important for all of us. Displacement is an issue that affects all of us. And I want to emphasize this because maybe there are property owners out there saying, hey, you know what, displacement doesn't affect me because I bought my home 10 years ago. I'm safe. I feel secure. Well, let me just highlight why displacement affects you. It affects you because displacement is the destruction of the Berkeley we know and love, by forcing people who make up our community, by forcing them to leave it because it's become unaffordable. I want to take my land trust hat off for a second, and I want to just speak as a Berkeley resident, as a mother of 2 children who are in the Berkeley Unified School System. When my eldest was in 5th grade 3 years ago, this is when the housing prices skyrocketed and the rents peaked, she lost her teacher and her best friend to displacement in that same year. Her teacher couldn't afford to have a family in Berkeley, so she had to move back to Michigan. And my daughter's best friend's family had another child, and they couldn't afford to get a bigger place, and they had to leave, even though these were 2 hardworking, middle-income people doing all their best to try to make a good life for their children. When people like that are hit, you know that the system is broken down. It's just not working. And this affects you whether you're a renter or a property owner, because if you have children in the school system, it's your taxes that are going to make that school the quality that it is. And if your teachers can't afford to live here, let me tell you, your children's education is just going to go down the toilet. And that is a huge problem. That's not a problem just for renters. It's a problem for property owners. It's a problem for all of us when our teachers, our first responders, our nurses, our educators, the people that we rely on in our community that make up our community, when they're forced to leave, that is the destruction of what the place we call home. That's the destruction of the place that nurtures us and makes us have the support systems that we have around us. So I want to just emphasize that. Thank you, Pastor Mike.
Thank you, Saki. We've had a few more minutes on this question. Richard, I'd love to get you in if you'd like to have a comment in this moment. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Here in San Francisco, first as a tenant rights lawyer and then as a realtor, I have tried over the years to organize tenants to buy their buildings, mainly when the buildings go up for sale. And I've had some successes, but I'll tell you, I worked a lot on a lot more buildings than I was able to close deals for. And, there are some real challenges for tenants buying buildings here. One is the process to getting financing is you have a group of long-term tenants. They may not know each other just because they live in the same building together. They may not trust each other. It takes several meetings to build trust and confidence among people who may be strangers to one another, to accept what they might consider an invasion of their privacy, to share their finances and share their dreams in order to get some group financing. That's one. You can work through that, but it takes time and it takes organizing effort. When you have long-term tenancies or a long-term rent-controlled building, often there's a lack of maintenance in the building. So soon you find that you have a construction project, not just an acquisition. So you have a two-part loan. You're going to have to, perhaps spend money to hire people to tell you how much is it going to cost to make these repairs. Tenants don't always want to do that, unless they know they're going to be able to buy the building. So that can be a real challenge. Sometimes you can work through that, but it does take time and it takes effort. Another real obstacle or hurdle, I should say, is party orientation. People become invested in their roles. Tenants have been tenants, and their outlook is as a tenant, and they don't always look forward to solutions as much as they may look past or back in time to, things happening that created mistrust between them and the landlord. And the landlords and the agents, they don't always trust the tenants. You have to gain that trust. You have to earn that trust. And still sometimes you wonder if the tenants are taken seriously. I try to change the name of the parties. Instead of landlords and tenants, I call them sellers and buyers. And just that change actually, I think, helps people get their mind around what we're trying to do here. Unfortunately, the most important buildings, the larger ones with the longer term tenants, are the hardest to get. In the private market now out there, the timeline at which these buildings trade is crushing. It can happen really fast. First of all, sometimes the tenants don't even know their building's for sale. Other times when it does go on the market and the tenants can have an advocate and organize and get financing in place and have inspections made, it's almost impossible for them to do that in the time that it might take an ordinary, property owner, apartment building investor to buy the building.
So Richard, really quickly, because we're going to wrap this section up, but this is going to be a great lead and segue to the next piece. As we go forward, the next question, and this is really going to be for you and Tanya, as well as Hewitt and Seema. Let's talk about some of the successes from DC and San Francisco, and what are some things that we can learn from DC specifically. Hewitt, Seema, I'll throw it out to you, and then Tanya, if you really want to jump in, and then Richard will have you back clean up again, if that works.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just, I can kick us off. It's just so great to have COPA in place now for about 1.5 years, and to be able to really see how that's rolling out in a Bay Area city that's facing some of the very similar challenges here in Berkeley. And of course, as anti-displacement and affordable housing advocates, DC's longstanding success with TOPA and also the tenant testimonies of victories, it really was a major inspiration for us and CJ, without a doubt, helping us to explore possible tenant right to purchase in Berkeley to help level the playing field. And with that, there were also many issues we considered in evaluating DC's policy to best develop a policy specifically tailored for Berkeley's context. Factors that we looked into included causes of displacement, Berkeley's rental housing stock, evaluating that, and tenant needs, like having a notice of sales and support. And so Seema's going to kick us off into more specifics about the similarities and differences of Berkeley's proposal.
Yeah, so similar to DC, Berkeley's proposed policy is a tenant-centered policy, which means tenants have the primary rights. Richard will speak more to COPA, which is a nonprofit right. And, you know, the tenants' rights are reflected in the timelines of TOPA and the process. We did layer on a secondary right so that affordable housing developers can come and preserve the rental property if tenants waive their rights or, you know, can't purchase. Unlike DC, in our proposed policy, tenants can't sell their rights. And that's really important for us because we want to make sure that if a qualified organization, meaning a developer, is purchasing the property under this policy, that they're vetted, that they meet certain criteria. For example, being committed to keeping the property permanently affordable, being committed to resident empowerment, things like that. And that's really to meet the goal of one of the goals of the policy being to promote democratic residential control of properties. This also, you know, this could include, these affordable housing developers could include land trusts, cooperatives, other nonprofit housing developers, and the city would maintain a list of these orgs similar to in San Francisco under COPA. And so they are vetted. There are also two primary rights. So there's a right of first offer and there's a right of first refusal. So that's also similar to San Francisco's COPA policy. And there is a financial incentive, as we've mentioned, for sellers who sell to the tenants or a qualified org at the initial right of first offer stage. We've also built in technical assistance in the policy in the form of supportive organizations. So this is unique to Berkeley's policy. We know that tenants need help to be able to purchase. As you heard from Richard, there's a lot that tenants need. And so tenants would work with a supportive org that could advise them on their rights, assess options of renting, continuing to rent versus becoming a homeowner, and help them exercise their rights and move through the process smoothly. Hewitt, did you want to add about financing?
Definitely. So in addition to the legal rights, which are so important, we've learned from DC and San Francisco just how vital it also is to create an ecosystem for acquisition funding and support for TOPA's success, right? So we really want to underscore that, which you'll hear more about in just a second from those who have been in DC and seen this on the ground for much longer. Fortunately, in Berkeley, we aren't starting from scratch. We have the Housing Trust Fund, we have SSP, all as preservation resources to build upon to help support TOPA projects. And notably in DC, the district is not the only entity that funds TOPA transactions. We have banks, community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, philanthropy, county, state, and federal funds are all potential sources, funding sources. And so likewise in Berkeley, we must, and we are, thinking creatively about how to leverage the existing local resources and our networks to be able to fund housing preservation solutions like TOPA.
Great. So we've got about 5 minutes left in this section. So Tanya, if you can jump in, and then Richard, as we finish up.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make this quick. There's a lot to know about how TOPA has been an incredible tool in the District of Columbia. We've had it for much longer. We've had it since 1979. The District of Columbia got home rule in the 70s, and our leaders all came, for the most part, from the civil rights movement. So there was a really strong focus on making sure that we figured out ways to help people stay in place. The upshot of our TOPA policy has created not only affordable cooperatives, limited equity cooperatives, and hybridized cooperatives, but also affordable rental on large scale. And it has developed it's been an incredible boon to our community development community, in that we have a number of sophisticated nonprofits that have grown up around TOPA, but we also have community-based organizations and lawyers and developers who are all sort of interested in making sure that the policy works well. The challenges that we've seen in DC, the places where we really faced problems, were a lack of intentionality. In the years where we didn't have dedicated funding for TOPA, where our Housing Production Trust Fund was unfunded, which was for a very long time. It was created in 1988, but not fully funded until 2000s. Those things have hindered TOPA, and they have also helped add to displacement issues in the District of Columbia. I maintain that if we had had more serious dedicated funding and also dedicated staff from our government, the lack of intentionality for time. So I think that's one of the ways that we sort of over a long period of time have seen things sort of be problematic. But there are places where we have had major wins. In the last 20 years, we've seen a shift where we've seen hybrid co-ops and condos and affordable housing come into play. I myself live in a TOPA building. It's a small cooperative, but it's a hybrid because it was predominantly senior citizen when I first moved here. The 75% senior citizen, and the District of Columbia came in to help the people who were older, who were on fixed income, who, if the building was sold, would have to try to figure out how to make a rent that would probably have tripled, if we're being honest. And what happened was we were able to buy down the price for each one of the people on fixed income and sell to people like me at market rate. And so the way that our co-op still works 15 years later is that those people in the low income category, the fixed income category, when we go up in our carrying charges, when we have to finance something, when we have to pay for something in our building, people like me pay more, people like them pay less because they don't have as much income, but they get to stay in the community that they contributed to for a lifetime. I'm about to turn 50 and I live around the corner from the house that I grew up in a building that is populated with people who made my community safe and enjoyable for me growing up through some really difficult times. So it's prioritizing the people who have been contributing for a really long time. And I think that that's one of the things that's lost in this conversation. I also want to say that one of the biggest boons has been preservation of naturally occurring affordability. In addition to creating affordable housing, we've also been able to go places and actually say, well, this is a really great building that functions quite well and it actually has appropriate rents. And by not having a for-profit developer come in and try to figure out how to expand the parameters and make as much money as possible, people have been able to stay in place, live affordably, and continue, again, to contribute to the community that they're a part of. The last thing I want to say is that this has really been a policy that has helped define the concept of leverage across the board for all of affordable housing creation in the district. And it has also been the jumping off point for a lot of creativity for other tools in our affordable housing toolbox. There is not one person in the district who would tell you that TOPA is the end all be all for creating or saving affordability in the city. But everybody can agree, even people who are opposed to the policy, that there are some bright, shining examples of places where this has not only created a huge win for a neighborhood in terms of preservation, but also sparked new ideas of great ways to do even more different things with affordable housing. Our nonprofit affordable housing community really sprung up around TOPA. And then we have community-based organizations that are nonprofits that are funded by the city that are free to every single resident that focus on affordable housing issues. And TOPA was their sort of line in. And now they're able to be experts for people to help them figure out what all the tools are that they can access. And finally, in terms of finance, everybody's gotten on board with it because it's a way to make money. If you're a bank, if you're a lender, if you're anybody, you can make money off of this. This is not something that is going to mean that you don't make money. Everybody makes money in the process. People also learn how to do really sophisticated financing for their property because of the broad array of tools that now exist in our toolbox. And there are a lot of different ways that we've been able to help different groups of people stay in place because this is the law of the land. And all of the developers, nonprofit and for-profit, know that it is. And they comply with it and they work with it. And for-profit developers have done a lot of deals in the last 15 years that were TOPA deals.
Great. We got about 2 minutes. Richard, can you jump in real quick as we wrap up?
Okay, I'll try to talk slowly and get through quickly. So here in San Francisco, we have COPA, which is community organizations buying, not TOPA. The laws are very similar though, and you know both laws are based on a preemptive right that's created, and both laws and processes will require a lot of tenant involvement and transparency. I participated with a group organized by the supervisor that sponsored COPA here a couple years ago, and I was part of the team that made recommendations for the drafting of COPA. I think the realtors very much were opposed to COPA at first, but once it passed, they seriously mobilized. They created forums to instruct their agents on how to do the right thing. They had seminars. They taught the agents how to comply with COPA and to have their clients comply with COPA. They're nothing realtors if not efficient, and they have actually helped institutionalize the law and worked with me personally, and I think with some of my clients on establishing best practices and just normalizing the law and making it part of the ordinary process. It's one of many laws that realtors have to deal with on every transaction. There's dozens of laws, and realtors are good at it's what they do. They get their clients to comply with all those laws, and adding one more COPA, what turns out I don't think was such a big deal for them. So the bottom line is COPA has been pretty successful. And I think TOPA will too, because it's going to also provide a framework. People will know what to expect. All parties will have more confidence in the process of tenants buying these buildings, and the sellers will still get their fair market value. And that seems like a more level playing field to me.
So, Richard, as we segue into the next one, next question, you started to touch on some of this, but this is specifically for you and Saki. What will be the impacts on property owners? If you want to jump in, and then Saki, if you want to follow behind that, let's talk about the impact of TOPA on property owners.
Okay, good. For most sellers, the impact is almost nothing, because the truth is that community organizations can only buy so many buildings, and most of them get through the process without there being interest in buying the buildings. In future, more may be affected, but it's not the big scary event that people thought it was going to be when they were afraid of the law passing. Most so far who go through the process that I've been involved with, where the nonprofit expresses interest, we've been making those deals at the first offer stage. And that's the first part of COPA, where everything is voluntary. We just negotiate back and forth with the seller through their agent usually. It's all voluntary. We hammer out the terms, and then we're in contract and we get the deal done. So far, that's worked like a charm. We closed our first deal early. We've closed on several since then. And I think that bodes well, and I think a lot of people have more confidence in the process because we've had successes so far. I do get calls from realtors who want information about COPA, and I give it to them. Occasionally we have people, like there's recently an out-of-town agent who I think didn't get the education because they're not active in the San Francisco Association of Realtors, and they didn't follow the process, and I had to confront them, and we worked it out though, and it turns out that we were able to get through that process without a lot of harm for their seller. They gave us the information we needed to make our analysis, and it turned out my client didn't want to buy the building, and we were able to accommodate them and let them go. And they're members of the community too. So that turns out, even when we ran into a problem, that turned out to be a positive experience.
Great. Saki, we got about 3 or 4 minutes. You want to jump in, talk about
Sure.
the impact on property owners?
Sure, Pastor Mike. I think it's so important to clarify because there's just so much misinformation out there. And we do need to emphasize that there is very minimal impact on property owners. You are not forced to sell your property. You only sell your property at fair market value when you are ready to put your home on the market. And if you get a higher offer from a third party, you are free to accept that, so long as you give a chance to the tenants to match that price. But there is no regulation of the price going on with TOPA. That's very important to make clear. Another is that if you don't rent property, this isn't going to affect you at all. If you're in an owner-occupied single-family home or renting an ADU or any other part of your home, this is not going to affect you at all. There's also a number of exemptions. If you're going to make a transfer to your heirs or a family member, that is not affected at all by TOPA. Similarly, if you need to sell your home as a result of a medical emergency, even a rental property because of medical emergency, there is an exemption for that. Furthermore, there are a number of benefits to the sellers. For example, there's an incentive to the sellers to, in the sense of that they get a certain portion of the city transfer tax that reimbursed. So they'll get thousands of dollars in savings as a result of this. And there's also mutual benefit because, if the tenant buys as is and there's tons of deferred maintenance that the seller doesn't want to take care of, that's a win-win on both sides. So there are a number of things that are beneficial to the seller, and there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't apply to property owners at all. And that's just very important to put out there.
Can I make one more point?
Sure.
So one thing that surprised me was the number of agents who told me when the deal closed, actually my client is very happy with the way this turned out because it's important to them, the legacy they leave in San Francisco. They want to sit around the Thanksgiving dinner table when we all can again and tell their family that, yeah, I sold that building and I sold it to this really interesting, great nonprofit that it's going to keep the tenants in place and it's going to be affordable housing forever. And I think they feel really good about that. And I don't want to, I get that from agents, not just under the COPA deals, but even the earlier deals I did, maybe 35 of them or so with nonprofits buying buildings under small sites before COPA. And that's been a consistent theme, and I think it's important. A lot of people do want it. They want to feel about doing the right thing.
Great. This final question to the panelists, this is going to go to Logene and Alexis. Based on your personal experiences, why are you in support of TOPA? Logene, if you'd like to go first, and then we'll turn it over to Alexis. We got about 6 minutes to really discuss this portion. Logene, you're muted, my dear.
I'm interested in TOPA and support TOPA because I've been in real estate for 31 years and I've seen the market changes and I've seen affordability become the major issue in real estate purchases. I find myself now with buyers finding affordability means going to Antioch or going to Suisun, or I was going to Mountain House yesterday. I mean, affordability is getting harder and harder and harder to touch. So any way that we can stem the lack of affordability and provide local housing to people so they don't have to leave the area that they love. Like, I'm from Berkeley, and I grew up in Berkeley. I went to Lincoln Elementary School, which is now Malcolm X, but that's how long ago I went. I went to Longfellow in Berkeley. I went to Garfield, which is now Martin Luther King, and I graduated from Berkeley High. This is my home. I went to church with Pastor Michael Smith. Pastor Michael Smith's mother was the usher, one of the ushers at McGee Avenue Baptist Church. My home is here. I still shop in Berkeley. My office is in Berkeley, but I can't live in Berkeley. So affordability is very important to me. And I don't think in my years that I, as a realtor, I learned to adjust to the new rules and regulations. The other realtors will do the same. And there are organizations that are just eager to support affordability and train people and teach them how to move forward. And I see it as a great idea. The cooperatives, tenants getting together and buying buildings and keeping them affordable for the future generations. That's why I'm in TOPA. I support TOPA. And I think realtors in this area will support TOPA also when it becomes a regulation, a law.
Great, great, great. Alexis, you want to jump on in?
Yes, I just want to bounce off what she said about affordability and living where you consider home. I also went to Longfellow. I went to Rosa Parks. Everybody graduates from Berkeley High if you're a Berkeley resident. So this is a place that a lot of people call home, and you want to continue to grow your family and be able to live where what is home. And I've spoken to a lot of my old classmates who no longer have that option to live where a place where they know and have been around forever. So affordability, and then just the community and building and continuing that. I have a family here in my building with the 4 other residents we have, and they've known me since I attended YMCA daycare on 10th Street, so that's not something you come across a lot. My grandmother raised me. My grandmother is no longer here, but the residents know her and they take care of me as if I'm their own. So there's a lot of parts of this that makes it possible to continue a community that Berkeley brings and fosters. So that's why I'm supportive of it.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you to our panelists. At this time, we're going to get ready to go into some questions from our audience. There are some questions that have been selected. Again, we will continue to monitor questions. If you haven't had questions in the chat, you can also submit those questions to Berkeley TOPA at gmail.com, and we'll continue to be monitoring those things. But we're going to get into the questions from Zoom, and we're going to be turning some of these questions over to the panelists. And so panelists, as I read some of these questions off, you'll have an opportunity over the next several minutes to give some really thoughtful answers to the best of your abilities. So the first question comes from Julia Cato, which is, why is TOPA important for tenants? Any one of the panelists, why is TOPA important for tenants?
Well, it seems to me it gives tenants an opportunity, a secure opportunity to purchase the building that they live in. It's more than what we have right now, which is the first right of refusal. That's pretty relaxed, but there are some guidelines here and support. There's a support system for moving forward that does not exist now. I think that's why it's important for tenants.
Yes. like I spoke about my story earlier, we didn't know our building was for sale. So knowing about the intent to sell is really crucial to having a voice in where you live and staying at home.
Great. Anyone else?
I just want to say, I don't think the tenants have a fair chance. They sometimes have no chance to buy a building when it comes up for sale. And they're the ones that live in the building. And this law is designed to get the seller the fair market value of the building, a price that the seller agrees to. So I don't see how there's anything wrong with that. It's just community preservation.
Great. Any other insights for that first question? If not, our second question comes from Igor. And sorry, so the question is, what kind of research that went into designing the timeline and other aspects of the policy? What is the research that went into designing the timeline and other aspects of TOPA? If anyone could speak to that.
I can start. So yeah, the timelines were based on a lot of research, including focus groups with tenants, where we broke down the different steps that people would need to take to exercise their rights and try to find out for tenants living in different types of housing, right? Like different number of units, different housing situations, how long it would take them and what they would need at each step. We also did research by talking to nonprofit housing developers, including the Community Land Trust, and figuring out how long it takes typically for tenants to gather financial information, to get pre-qualified. We also talked to lenders to find out how long it would take to secure financing for some of these different property types and for affordable housing projects as well. We also looked at DC's timelines, and we looked at, the MLS data in Berkeley, but mostly the timelines were designed to give tenants and qualified organizations enough time to actually exercise rights and purchase properties in Berkeley in order to make the policy meaningful. And then we also did, make certain concessions. So ideally, we'd have even more time than is currently allocated in the ordinance. But we understand that there has to be, some reasonableness around timelines. And so there's a number of ways. If you look at our website and the timeline FAQs, you'll see some of the ways that these were designed, and also that we tried to shorten them as well, understanding, the perspective of sellers.
Great, thank you very much. This next question, how will TOPA purchases be financed, and who will pay for the ongoing repairs and maintenance? I'll read it again. How will TOPA purchases be financed, and who will pay for the ongoing repairs and maintenance?
I'm happy to kick this off, and if Saki would like to chime in as well. So I think several sources. Tenants coming together, pulling their income and assets, private financing. And I think another key piece of this is local government support. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this forum, my intention is to put significant additional funding in our small sites program, which is a program that was created several years ago to allow nonprofits to buy existing multifamily properties to keep them permanently affordable. We need to expand the eligibility to enable tenants. But if we can put $10 million as a starting point into the small sites program, that could provide an additional match so that tenants can, make a down payment while they're pulling their resources and seeking private capital. And so I think part of it's going to involve government support, but also part of it is going to involve the private sector as well.
Very well.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. should I follow up a little bit on that? I won't take that long.
Sure.
So an additional factor are like community banks and community partners, like the Local Initiative Support Corporation that was so critical in a project, for example, that we did in partnership with the McGee Avenue Baptist Church. LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, actually finances as well the projects in DC. And we're currently in conversation with LISC in DC and LISC here in the Bay Area to come up with different financing packages so that we can accelerate these projects and to leverage some of the existing finances coming from local government.
Thanks, Saki. Here's a here's a question somewhat related, and if you or others can jump in this. This question says, how does permanent affordability work, and will it tank sale prices in Berkeley?
Okay, so permanent affordability works in the following way. Rather than, as I mentioned, providing a subsidy or a loan, for example, that it's a long-term loan that usually doesn't actually get repaid, for example, from LISC. These loans, they don't just go into one generation of the buyers, but rather it stays with the land. So the land itself is not sold, but what's sold is the structure on it. So your home is your home and you're able to sell that, but you sell it with a resale restriction, and the resale restriction is what allows it to stay permanently affordable, so that next generation of home buyers is not buying it at the market price, but rather at a resale restricted price. Now, I just want to emphasize that not all properties bought through TOPA will be subject to permanent affordability. Those homes that are bought through TOPA through the qualified organizations that have the secondary right. So the tenants first get the right to go ahead and purchase the property, but then the second is the qualified organizations. If it's bought through a qualified organization like a land trust, we ensure permanent affordability, but that doesn't apply to all TOPA properties.
So great. So similarly, the next question for you or anyone who can jump in that's somewhat related to that. So how does the transfer tax exemption work? And are there other incentives for property owners? Anyone? How does the transfer tax exemption work? And are there other incentives for property owners?
I'm happy to kick this off, and if maybe Seema or somebody from East Bay Community Law Center can chime in. Currently, owners of multifamily property pay they pay a transfer tax, and they also pay a gross receipts tax to the city of Berkeley. And so we were trying to find financial incentives to encourage property owners to participate. And so part of what the proposed TOPA ordinance would do would provide a rebate of a portion of the transfer tax if property owners were to participate in the program to provide a financial incentive. And we think that this is one tool the city can provide to enable these transactions. But I don't know if Seema or Hewitt have anything else to add.
I'll just add, and this was kind of mentioned, but I think what we've heard from some realtors and, we spoke with sellers who sold properties under COPA in San Francisco. And some of these were already mentioned by Richard and others, but there is just the incentive of selling to tenants who already know the condition of the property, who have lived in it, who are happy and prepared to buy it, as opposed to having to talk to other buyers who might want to know how much rent can they get from the property. Is there maintenance that's needed, right? Is there rehab that's needed? So it could be a good opportunity to sell to the people who already live there, who already call it a home, who already want to purchase it, and potentially not to have to, deal with figuring out the cost of maintenance and rehab and to take care of all of that. Sometimes, you'll negotiate that with the tenants if they're buying, but being able, the potential of avoiding that process, it has been seen as a benefit to some sellers, including sellers who sold properties under COPA in San Francisco.
Yeah, and to add to that, you know, having the advantage of a built-in buyer, as Seema described, also allows for the seller to begin to get the property ready and account for part of that time concurrently in the initial stage. And so at the very initial stage that gets activated when the seller provides the notice to sell, the tenants have some time to respond to give a statement of interest about whether or not they're even wanting to proceed. And so during that period, sellers can still get the property ready for sale, you know, be able to undertake, you know, those essential steps. And so that's something that we want to make sure isn't lost.
Thank you. So here's a question semi-related to that. And I'd love for the East Bay Law Center or any of you to jump in this. Question is, the TOPA timeline is too long. Why is it so long? And how will it affect owners, property owners? The timeline.
Yeah, that's a fair question. You know, we're talking about a real estate transaction, and you know, we're here trying to reduce the barriers, right? Like the institutional barriers that exist in the system of transacting. And so, even as a first-time home buyer after over a decade of renting, I know and I can see that. And so, tenants at the first stage of responding to the notice of intent have to submit a statement of interest. Now, what does that mean, right? So if you're in a building with multiple tenants, that means you have to organize meetings. You have to work with a supportive partner to actually understand your right, to determine if you want to move forward. All of that is essential. And it's also critical for the seller, because these are all the undertakings that will ideally ideally lead to the offer stage, where the tenants, in order to be competitive, will want to submit a pre-qualified offer. And so, you know, there is the human aspect, right, of needing to, one, get financing in order for multiple tenants who are serious about buying. There's also the external factors of working with lenders. And already, even in the existing commercial realities, it takes time to secure that financing, right? And so once the seller and the buyer enter into a contract, really there's not that much different from an ordinary transaction, because you have two parties that are already contracting and working towards closing. And so really it's at the statement of interest and the offer stage that we're wanting to ensure that we have the necessary time for tenants to be able to make an informed decision.
I'll just add that, you know, the timelines are shortest for single family homes because we realize the sensitivities around that. And we've actually done a comparison with some MLS data from the first half of 2020 in Berkeley, and the timeline's not that different. It's very similar, the timeline under TOPA and the time that it takes for the average timelines for selling a single family home in Berkeley, at least from the data that we had pulled. So I want to mention that. And there's also a number of ways that we've tried to mitigate the risks of sort of this process, like really holding up a sale. So like Hewitt said, there's the letter of interest stage. There's also joint notification in the very beginning to tenants and qualified orgs, so that the qualified organizations can start thinking about whether they want to purchase and act quickly if the tenants decide to assign rights or to waive their rights. And then qualified orgs are given a small amount of time if the tenants waive their rights or use their whole timeline, a small amount of time, like 5 days, to act. Also, like Hewitt said, tenants are working with a supportive partner who helps them move through the process, decide early. Do they want to move forward, or do they not? Do they not even have any interest in purchasing this property together? And unlike Washington, D.C.'s policy, tenants can't sell their rights. And so there's not really that financial motive for holding up a sale or for, maybe moving forward without the intent of buying. Not to say that that happens a lot in DC, but some people have brought that up in questions. And, we've tried to eliminate that risk in the policy in Berkeley.
Very good, very good. Could any of you please explain or reiterate actually which properties will be impacted by TOPA? Which properties will be impacted by TOPA?
Yeah, so all rental properties as a baseline rule come under TOPA. That being said, there are a number of exemptions. So first and foremost, if you have a tenant occupied building, then most likely your property will be subject to TOPA unless an exemption applies. One of the big exemptions is the owner occupied single family homes that might be rented out, or an ADU or secondary dwelling unit, any other unit that's attached to the building or on the single family unit. And so if it's owner occupied, then that category of properties will be exempt from TOPA. Now, there's also a number of transactions that are exempt. And again, this is on our yes-to-topa.org website, just clarifying a bit. Transfers to family members are exempt, as well as any transfers in the form of an inheritance transaction. Those types of transactions are exempt. Also, we have careful consideration for in the limited scenario for medical emergencies for smaller properties. So that's something that's was already a part of the policy when it was introduced last year in March. And so what we're doing now is just streamlining the actual procedure for that.
Great. Next question. And definitely this is for anyone, but specifically Tanya and Richard, if you can jump in this. How has DC or San Francisco measured TOPA's impact and success?
Well, I personally was actually in charge of a study of limited equity cooperatives in the early 2000s, and the vast majority of those were created through TOPA. But the Department of Housing and Community Development has also been the main place where we have measured how many units have been created. And there's ongoing reporting requirements from all of the nonprofits that are involved in any aspect of TOPA. So we have statistical data that sort of rolls up to the government from community-based organizations that do the counseling and provide input and help people figure out how to organize their tenant association and find a development team and get to the finish line of a deal. And we have specific information that comes along with that. We also have a number of nonprofits, but one in particular, the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development, which has done a ton of study of not only TOPA, but a lot of things about the affordable housing market. And as I stated before, TOPA is sort of a jumping off point for a lot of other affordable housing tools. So we have a fairly robust tracking system for how many units are created and how many people get to stay in neighborhoods for how long. The thing that I would say is that there was a long period in the 80s and the first half of the 90s where the data collection wasn't as robust. So we don't have as much good information from before 2000, before I'd say like around 95 or 96. And 2000 is when we really started to sort of put it in searchable places for people to be able to access. But we've had a lot of study of TOPA, and we've had a lot of neighborhood study of people who has gotten to stay and who has not gotten to stay. And one of the things that we found overwhelmingly in terms of preservation of specifically Black families is that TOPA is one of the tools that really has been helpful. What we find also with all of our affordable housing purchasers is that people who buy affordably stay in their units much longer than anyone else. They are attached to the neighborhood, they're attached to the building, they're attached to the place in the way that a lot of other people are not. DC is transient in a lot of ways, even though there are people who are actually from here and live here, and I'm one of them. But DC is very transient in the same way that Berkeley is very transient. And that has been something we really have struggled with, is making sure that the market actually works for the people who live and work here and are going to stay here for a long time versus the people who are coming through to flip their property. And so a lot of TOPA has been focused on, a lot of TOPA and a lot of our other tools have been focused on creating stability. And the net effect is that people who buy affordably or rent affordably stay where they are because they can afford it, and it's a community they're invested in. So we do see a lot of really long-term people who contribute in many other ways that are very important to our neighborhoods because they were able to find an affordable place to perch and contribute. We have a lot of different organizations and elected. We have a very specific elected official called an area neighborhood advisory neighborhood commissioner, and it's very interesting to see who serves in that capacity, because those are your most locally elected officials, and they don't get paid. Many of those, especially in the ward that I grew up in, were people who became more engaged in their community through their fight for housing. And they stay and contribute by giving back to the fabric of their neighborhood because they have an affordable place to live. So I don't think that that's something that should be discounted, but you can find out quite a bit about the statistics for our housing on the Department of Housing and Community Development's website. And then you can also see who the community-based organizations are that contribute. Their websites have a lot of statistical information. And then the last place I would say has a lot of information is the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development, which has an institute that studies very specifically the affordable housing market in the District of Columbia.
Great. Richard, if you want to add anything for a couple of minutes about COPA and its impact, we've got about 9 minutes left and a couple of more questions we definitely want to get to.
Good. Very briefly, COPA has been online in San Francisco for about 1.25 years. And we had a big pandemic in the middle of all that. So I don't know what data there is out there so far. If I were looking for data, I would contact the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development in San Francisco. I would first look at their website and see what information may be available there. I'm frankly not aware of what data they're collecting, if any, and I do think it's a great idea going forward if we were to collect data like that. Another place might be contacting directly the various qualified nonprofits and asking them, or looking at their websites to see what transactions they've done under COPA. But there aren't that many because it's a very new law.
Very well. Thank you for that. Next question. Please explain how TOPA applies to single-family homes and exemptions. How does TOPA, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know, I might be repeating, but yes, so for single family homes, TOPA offers an exemption for single family homes that are owner occupied if the owner is using that property as their principal residence. And it also allows an exemption for owner occupied single family homes that include an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, or other secondary dwelling, where an owner occupies either the single family home or the other secondary unit as their principal residence.
Thank you. I know you had talked about that earlier. I appreciate that follow-up. Next question. How are tenants supported through TOPA? How will they be educated and be able to make a good offer? How are tenants supported through TOPA? How will they be educated and be able to make a good offer?
I can kick us off, and if others want to chime in. Saki, I see you were going to say something. So we've mentioned that there is technical assistance built into the policy. So if tenants want to pursue a purchase under TOPA, they have to work with a supportive organization. And we don't have, who those supportive organizations would be yet exactly. But it could be a land trust, it could be EBCLC, it could be another organization that can do counseling for tenants with city support, and the city would also play a part of that role. But basically, the idea is that, you know, we've asked tenants and focus groups kind of what support they would need through the process, and these supportive organizations would advise on the pros and cons of staying a renter and maybe assigning their rights to a qualified org to become their landlord versus becoming homeowners. You know, what is it like to purchase collectively? What will it take? Can they financially afford to purchase? So helping tenants gather financial information and talk to lenders and get pre-qualified. Ideally, the lenders would sort of be lined up so that, and there would be like information sheets and stuff. And all of this, our idea and intention is that a lot of this would become more streamlined with time, but that there is some planning for implementation so that there could be forms that tenants have. And then they would get like the more personalized, tailored advising through a supportive organization. Saki, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add, we're an organization that will be one of these qualified organizations, and we have years of experience with guiding tenants through a process of purchasing their building, either through the limited equity cooperative or through rental management if they decide that they're not ready for that. But there's many, many stages in the process of getting tenants ready to purchase a property, not just the things that, Seema mentioned about bringing tenants together around the statement of interest and gathering the finances, but also the things could continue afterwards, that are so critical to making limited equity co-ops work. Like, for example, making sure there's a budget and making sure that there's all of the maintenance issues are going to be addressed in the future and that there's a plan for that. And that's why supportive organizations are so critical.
Very good. We have time for one final question, and then we're going to wrap up. This last question, have there been any legal challenges to TOPA or sales that sidestep TOPA that were reversed by the courts? Anything? We've got about a minute for that. If anybody can jump in, and then we're going to wrap the evening up.
I just want to start in response to this question, and maybe one of the experts can follow up. There's a misunderstanding that TOPA is going to reduce your property values. All TOPA does is give tenants the right of first refusal and the right of first offer. You can then sell the property at market value. So I just want to clarify that we're not taking your property away from you. We're not depressing the market value. It will still be sold at market value. I don't know if one of the other experts wants to add on.
I just want to jump in and add, that there's this idea that what's going to happen with TOPA is that the homes that are going to be resold by the next generation of buyers, so the tenants will purchase, but when they sell it, it's suddenly going to become like rent control. All of the homes are going to be resale restricted. That's not true. Actually, the latest version of the policy, and as I just mentioned before when the question was asked earlier about TOPA applying to purchases by tenants, when they purchase their building with their own private capital, that is not resale restricted. Okay, so they are able to use that as a vehicle for their own wealth creation, and that stays floating on the market. So the idea that this is a kind of regulation which is intervening in the market and stopping the market from working the way it ought to is completely false. It is simply just leveling the playing field in terms of allowing this little slowdown in the timelines to get financing together, but it does not in any way interfere with fair market value.
Very good. We are really at time. And I know that there are many questions that people still have. There are comments that people still have. Again, we've said that if there are things in the chat, we will follow them. You can also send additional questions to Berkeley TOPA at gmail.com, and those things will be monitored. Again, I think Mr. Mayor had summed things up very well at the beginning. The truth is, TOPA may not be a silver bullet, but it is a tool for affordable housing. It is a tool to counterbalance the issues of displacement. And so we're really lifting the work that is done I ask that you just join me in thanking our distinguished panel that's given their time. I also really want to thank Mayor Erguin, his staff, as well as the support staff, Anna Cash, who really worked hard to help put this thing together, our friends and partners from the East Bay Community Law Center, again, all the partners, all the panelists, but especially those of you that have taken your time to come in. Again, you know, we may not have everything answered, but one of the things that we know is that we're moving forward for a more equitable Berkeley, a more equitable community. And so we thank you all. We hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And again, go to the website, go and bring your questions, and we'll do our best to make sure that we can really have some thoughtful answers. So thank you again. Bless you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And thank you for coming into our space this evening.